The scent still lingers in the air. A sweet scent, stuck in my memory like invisible glue. I know you've felt it. That moment when something seems out of place, but no one else notices. My whole life seemed perfect, like a table set for a banquet. Fresh flowers, gleaming silverware, everything in place. But all it takes is a sideways glance, a misplaced silence, and the table crumbles. That's exactly what happened to me. I believed him. The man who said I was his safe haven, who promised me fidelity until the end. For years, I let myself be lulled by this repetitive, sweet, and deceptive music, until I noticed the pause, the wrong note, the broken beat. The comebacks, ever later. The cell phone tucked away like a safe. The rehearsed apologies, all with the same hollow tone. And then came the day my skin crawled before the test even arrived. I felt it in the air. His touch was no longer mine. His voice carrying another name. It was like a stopped clock on the wall, always showing the same wrong time, reminding me that something was doomed to break. Betrayal didn't arrive like a storm. It trickled slowly, like water from a poorly closed faucet, filling the bucket until it overflowed. And when it overflowed, what should you do? Close your eyes. Pretend nothing happened. Or face it head-on, even if it hurts. I found more than suspicions. I found proof that left no room for excuses. Words written for another. Forgotten objects. And the detail that burned more than fire. The certainty that I was just a spare part, kept in silence, while he lived another life behind my back. At that moment, my breath caught in my chest. The world around me continued. The noise of cars on the street, the dog barking in the yard. But inside me, everything went silent. It's like standing before an abyss. Either you retreat, or you learn to use your own wings. And I asked myself, how far does a man think he can go without being discovered? How far does someone think he can reduce me to nothing, without waiting for me to rise? The risk was clear. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about dignity. It was about looking in the mirror and still recognizing the woman I once dreamed of. And that's where the story begins to take a turn. Because when you're pushed to the bottom, you discover a hidden force. A force that doesn't require shouting, but calculated silence. A force that paves the way for every lie to be uprooted. What he never imagined is that the secret itself would become the perfect trap. I remember the weight of the minutes that night. His every gesture was a silent confession, even though he believed he was acting perfectly. The way he hid his cell phone in his pocket, the way he avoided my gaze, the way he made up hasty excuses to justify delays that no longer needed an explanation. It was like watching a bad play, where the actor forgets his lines but still insists on staying on stage. I became a silent spectator to a lie growing inside my own home. And it's curious how the body perceives before the mind. The air seemed denser, its scent different, permeated with perfumes that didn't match our bed. There were moments when the room itself seemed to watch me, as if every piece of furniture held a secret. The sofa where we once sat side by side became nothing more than a backdrop of invisible distances. The silence, yes, was deafening. A silence that screamed. It wasn't just jealousy. It was my dignity slipping through my fingers. Have you ever felt that? That feeling of being reduced, diminished little by little, until there was barely anything left but a shadow. Each lie he told me stole a piece of me, and I knew that if I remained silent, I would end up believing I deserved so little. It was at this point that the pain turned into observation. I began to notice every detail. The quiet sound of messages arriving late at night. The smile that wasn't meant for me. The carelessness of a forgotten handkerchief. The reflection of the screen illuminating his face as he slept with his back to me. Each fragment was a piece that, little by little, completed the whole picture. And when the picture unfolded, there was no longer room for doubt. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't insecure, I wasn't making it up. I held in my hands the truth he'd so zealously hidden. The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion, it was a fact. And, inside me, something shifted. Fear gave way to a sharp calm, the same calm that precedes a thunderclap. It was in this calm that I realized I no longer needed to beg for answers. I didn't need to scream to be heard. True power lies in the silence of those who know how to wait for the right moment. And perhaps that's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation, because they recognize that moment when life changes direction. What he didn't know was that, while pretending to live two lives, I was already charting my own path. A path that didn't lead to wasted tears, but to something much greater, something he could never have imagined. And when the opportunity arose, I was ready, with every piece in place, waiting only for the exact moment when the lie would fall away. But what happens when the mask falls apart in front of everyone? That's when the story really starts to burn. With each passing day, the weight of the secret grew like a stone hidden within my chest. I walked through the house, and everything seemed to bear the mark of lies. The curtains we had once chosen together, now too closed, hid not only the sun but also the shadow of betrayal. The bed, once a place of rest, had become a stage for absences. Even the simple clink of cutlery at dinner became a reminder that something was broken between us. The pain wasn't just in him. It spread like silent cracks that threatened to tear down an entire wall. There were times when I almost convinced myself to give up on the plan. I thought about how much easier it would be to pretend, to move on like so many women do, to mask the wound and keep breathing. But then the memory of him laughing on the phone, his back to me, with an intimacy that no longer belonged to him, came back. That memory burned like a hot iron. It was impossible to ignore. I knew that if I accepted that reality, I would be signing my own invisibility. And yet there was also fear. Fear of crossing a line. Fear of losing control of what began as silent revenge. Fear was like a cold blade pressed against my skin, reminding me that every step needed to be precise, calculated. One mistake could turn me into a victim again. But along with the fear came another feeling, hope. Not the hope that he would change, but the hope of breaking free. Of looking forward without carrying invisible chains. It was this contrast that kept me going. Light and darkness danced within me, and with each wavering, I felt myself getting closer to the inevitable moment. His body betrayed me even without words. He arrived late, sweaty, but not from work. The smell of cheap perfume permeated his clothes, and there was always an air of barely contained satisfaction, as if he'd won some secret game. I watched silently while inside a storm brewed. It's strange how apparent calm can hide so much. On the outside, I offered calculated smiles, but inside I was already plotting every detail of the outcome. Neighbors commented on our family as if we were still a model of unity. I listened and stored this contrast as ammunition, because I knew, the more perfect the image he projected, the greater the fall would be when the mask was ripped off. Ruin never happens in the dark. It happens under bright lights when everyone is watching. And then I began to imagine what that moment would be like. Not an intimate confrontation, hushed up behind closed doors, but something bigger, something no one could deny or erase. An event that would etch its shame into the memory of everyone who knew us. I didn't just want to uncover the truth. I wanted to expose it. Silence became my ally. He believed I accepted it. He believed the game was won. And the more he believed it, the deeper he dug his own trap. But there was still something he didn't know. Something that was there, hidden, waiting to turn his confidence into despair. And when the time came, there would be no turning back. Sometimes I caught myself noticing small, almost banal details that took on disproportionate weight in my mind. The sound of the key turning in the lock later than it should have. The sound of the shower running for too long, as if the water could wash away not only the body but also the guilt. Even the way he'd drop his shoes in the corner of the room, not caring if the noise woke me, felt like a silent message. I was no longer part of his concerns. It was in those moments that reality became more cutting than any written test. And yet, there were times when my heart played tricks on me. When he sat at the table and asked how my day was. For a second I almost seemed like the man I once loved. Memory is treacherous, insisting on putting flowers where only thorns remain. I found myself torn between longing for what would never be again and the need to remember what he had truly become. This oscillation was cruel, but it also kept me awake, aware that there was no going back. I remember one particular night, when I stood before the bedroom mirror. The reflection showed a tired woman, but there was something beyond the dark circles and heavy shoulders. There was a spark in my eyes, a strength I barely recognized. It felt like standing before a closed door, knowing the key was in my own hands. The hard part wasn't opening it, but accepting that afterward, nothing would be the same. It's at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent signal that the message has touched them. 'Cause it's not just about me. Anyone who has been betrayed knows what I'm talking about. Anyone who has felt invisible in their own home understands this silence filled with screams that no one hears. I walked through the dark room, lit only by the dim streetlights streaming through the cracks in the window, each step echoing like a rehearsal for a performance yet to come. The walls held secrets that weren't mine, but I no longer feared them. On the contrary, each secret was another brick in the construction of the approaching outcome. At the same time, there was a curious paradox within me. Part of me longed for the moment of revelation, longed to see the mask fall before everyone. But another part felt a strange melancholy, as if I were about to bury not only a marriage but also a version of myself that could never return. It was a silent mourning, and perhaps the most painful of all. The contrast between this pain and the hope of liberation consumed me, creating a tension that seemed to pulse with every breath. I knew time was running out, and that soon the time would come to transform silence into action. And when that time came, the impact would not only be on him, but on all who believed they knew the truth. The most curious thing is that, even knowing what was coming, I felt that there was something even greater hidden in the darkness, waiting to be revealed. By then, I no longer saw just a man cheating on me. I saw an entire fabric unraveling before my eyes, like an ancient tapestry unraveling stitch by stitch until only the raw fabric remained. The marriage that had seemed solid showed its seams coming apart, and every banal detail of daily life became silent proof that something was irreparably broken. It was like walking on glass. Every step hurt, but I knew I couldn't stop. Sometimes fear overtook me. Fear of losing myself in that calculated silence. Fear that my calm would be mistaken for weakness. And at the same time, there was a stubborn hope growing within me, like a seed that insists on sprouting even in arid soil. It was the hope of finally breaking free, of taking a deep breath without feeling the bitter taste of lies sticking in my throat. The images came to me in flashes. Me alone in the kitchen, stirring the spoon in the pan, unaware of the burning food. Me lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the distant sound of the gate opening too late. Me staring at the ring on my finger, feeling the cold metal weigh like a chain. Each scene was a cruel reminder that I was no longer in a home, but in a theater where only I knew the truth. And there was also the strange duality that consumed me. Part of me wanted him to confess, for the lie to be ripped out in words, even if painful. But another part wanted the opposite, for him to continue believing his own act, so that his downfall would be even greater, more devastating, more public. It was this contradiction that kept me awake, between fear and power, between loss and conquest. I watched him sleep so peacefully, unaware that his every breath was measured by my decision. The dimly lit room seemed frozen in place, and I knew that soon this calm would shatter into shards. There was something almost poetic in silently laying the groundwork, in knowing that the greatest revelation of his life would come from the place he least expected. From me. And the longer I waited, the more I felt the lines between love and revenge blur. There was no longer room to recover what we had lost. What remained was a single path, and I was willing to walk it to the end. What he didn't know was that every day I kept a secret bigger than all his combined. And once that secret was exposed, there would be no escape. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the middle of the hallway, motionless, as if the ground had turned into a dark lake. All I had to do was hear the gate creak, the door open, the keys jingle on the table, and everything inside me split into two halves that didn't speak to each other. On one side, the woman who still remembered the easy laughter of the beginning, the coffee that perfumed the house, the music that lulled Sundays. On the other, the woman who learned to hear the noise behind the noise, the hidden thread that pulls truth out of the shadows. I breathed slowly, as if testing my own strength. He passed me with a wave, his shirt slightly wrinkled, a scent that wasn't ours. I responded with a tiny gesture and tucked that dissonant note into my silent collection. Life continued feigning normality. The tablecloth was carefully folded, the dishes lined up on the drainer. The bed was neatly made with a care that belied the absence it harbored. I became an expert at small rituals, like someone preparing a stage with focus and patience. The kitchen light in the early hours seemed colder, almost metallic. The clock ticked elastic, impossible hours. I stirred the sugar in the cup, listening to the thin sound of the spoon, and it was as if each turn drew a circle of protection around me. The house had its own heart, beating to a rhythm only I could perceive. There were days of translucent, almost luminous courage. I would wake with the clear certainty that nothing would bring me down, that my dignity was not in dispute, that my story would not end in a dark corner. On other days, the shadow came without asking permission, and I found myself thinking about what could still be lost. My surname, the portraits on the shelf, the friendships that choose sides when the truth bursts out. The fear wasn't of being alone. It was of being misunderstood, of seeing my calm mistaken for coldness, my strategy read as cruelty. I remembered the mirror and the quiet gleam in my eyes. There was the answer. I knew who I was. And knowing, the darkness could only touch me around the edges. As he spoke on the phone in the backyard, his voice too low to be casual, I felt the wood of the window vibrate slightly beneath my fingers. The late afternoon sky turned a boiling orange, and I wondered how many times a sunset could burn before it became routine. The neighbor's dog ran, children screamed in the distance, someone slammed a door. Urban life, noisy and unpoetic, was the perfect frame for the picture I was silently painting. The contrast strengthened me. The noise outside, the discipline inside. I began to notice how the world reacts when it senses change. The girl at the bakery looked at me kindly that day, as if sensing an invisible, discreet battle. The neighbor at the iron gate greeted me more slowly, her gaze lingering a second longer on my face, perhaps trying to decipher it. And I began to walk a little straighter, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. With each step, I mentally reviewed the edges of the plan, like someone checking the seams before putting on an important piece of fabric. There was no rush, but there was a timetable. There was no anger, but there was a dense energy demanding closure. At night, the room was divided into two climates. On his side, heavy breathing. His body turned to the wall, the carefree abandon of someone who believes nothing can reach him. On my side, the cold air, the window half open, the curtains swaying like a warning. I closed my eyes and could hear my own pulse, steady, disciplined, telling me I was close. And it was strange how, on the edge of this precipice, a tenderness for myself I hadn't known was born. A tenderness that doesn't forgive what hurt me, but embraces the woman who resisted. When I imagined the approaching scene, I saw no screams, no breaking glass, no pointing fingers. I saw white lights, hurried footsteps, technical voices, people gathered together without immediately understanding. I saw the truth imposing itself as gravity does. Inevitable, incontestable, silently cruel. And behind it all, I saw my serene face, like someone watching the tide sweep in what was never theirs. The line between fear and relief became as thin as a drumhead. One tap was enough to make it sound. I got up, turned off the kitchen light, and stood for a moment in the shadows, listening to the house. There was nothing more to adjust. All that remained was for time to do its work, that time that doesn't stop when we ask it to, but also doesn't fail when the time comes. And suspended between a final breath and the next step, I knew the night held something that would change the design of the walls forever. I knew time had begun to work in my favor. His every gesture, previously hidden behind practiced smiles, now felt like a thinly veiled confession. The way he straightened his tie before leaving, the way he cleaned his phone with the haste of someone trying to erase his tracks, the way he lingered a few extra seconds looking at his reflection in the hallway mirror. It was like watching a game where the opponent doesn't even realize they're already losing. And I, silent, just had to wait for the next move. The impact of this calculated silence wasn't limited to the two of us. The atmosphere in the house changed. The neighbors, always attentive to small variations in each other's routines, began to notice the late arrivals, the slamming of doors in the middle of the night, the whispers that escaped from the backyard. The walls seemed to absorb every sound, every gesture, and return it all as tension. I walked through the rooms, feeling the energy suspended, as if the house itself were breathing more deeply, aware that something was about to happen. And there were also the outward signs, more subtle but equally revealing. The lingering glances from acquaintances as we passed together on the street, the too cool handshake in casual encounters, the feeling that everyone was piecing together pieces they believed they were hiding. This invisible network of observers, even unintentionally, cemented the stage for the outcome. It was as if the entire world was aligned, waiting for the moment when the veil would fall for good. I thought of it like a scale. On one side, the effort he was making to keep the farce afloat, sustaining two lives like someone trying to hold up spinning plates in midair. On the other, the growing weight of the truth, pulling everything down with an inevitable force. It was only a matter of time before the scales tipped, until the sound of the fall echoed beyond our walls. Amidst this tension, I discovered something about myself. Silence wasn't just a weapon, it was a shield. It protected me from haste, blind anger, and impulsive decisions. I could observe without being noticed, plan without being interrupted. It was like holding a bow taut, the arrow ready, waiting only for the moment the target would be exposed. This waiting, though painful, gave me power. The nights were the hardest. He slept soundly, and I lay awake, listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing, mixed with the distant hum of the sleeping city. The contrast was stark. On one side, the peaceful unconsciousness of someone who believed they were safe. On the other, the firm vigilance of someone who already knew the end of the story. At those times, I wondered if anyone, looking from the outside, would be able to tell the difference. Have you ever found yourself wondering how you would react if you were in my shoes? These kinds of thoughts sometimes beg to be shared, like someone uttering something quietly to see if it resonates in other hearts. It was this silent sharing that kept me going. I wasn't alone, even if no one knew my plan. Because his every gesture, every oversight, was a confession that brought me closer to the ultimate truth. And deep down, I knew that when the downfall came, it wouldn't be just his. It would be for everyone who chose not to see, for everyone who believed in appearances instead of looking for the cracks. The stage was set. The curtains were still closed. And I, backstage, was adjusting the final details. The tension didn't ease. On the contrary, it grew like a tide approaching the sand, slowly covering everything in its path. And once that tide came, there would be no turning back. I could feel the line between appearance and reality growing ever thinner. He believed he was walking on solid ground, but I could see the holes opening up beneath his feet. It was like watching someone walk across a frozen lake without noticing the cracks spreading beneath the ice. Each step he took made a different sound, more fragile, more dangerous, and I knew it would only take one more gesture for everything to shatter. The house reflected this tension in every detail. The living room clock, which had once reassured me with its constant ticking, now seemed to be counting down. The smell of coffee, which had always comforted me, brought back bitter memories of mornings shared with someone who was no longer mine. Even the afternoon light streaming through the cracks in the curtains seemed to announce that darkness would arrive sooner than I expected. There was something almost alive in every corner, as if the walls were silently observing what I was preparing to do. But alongside this somber scenario, there were also glimpses of clarity. It was as if the pain had sharpened my vision, allowing me to see beyond the masks. I noticed how he struggled to maintain his composure at dinners, how he tried to appear overly attentive in front of friends, how he made a point of smiling when someone looked at us. This exaggerated performance was unconvincing. It was a confession disguised as zeal. And I, silent, accumulated every detail as if I were keeping stones in a secret pocket. The contrast accompanied me with every breath. Fear and hope lived side by side within me. There were days when fear seemed to win, whispering that I might be misunderstood, that exposure would have greater consequences than I imagined. But then hope came, firm and discreet, reminding me that the truth cannot be buried forever. It was a fragile balance, like holding water between your hands, always leaking, always demanding vigilance. I sometimes dreamed of the final moment. I saw surprised faces, raised voices, people rushing to understand what was happening. The setting changed in each dream. Sometimes it was in the illuminated backyard, sometimes in a room full of witnesses, sometimes on the street with curious neighbors. But the common thread was always the same. Him reduced to silence, exposed by his own arrogance. I didn't need to raise my voice. The spectacle wouldn't require my words, just the firm presence of someone who knows that justice, sooner or later, prevails. Time, that relentless ally, continued its work. It believed itself in control, while I already carried within me the certainty that control had changed hands. My every gesture, every restrained look, every measured breath, was part of a silent ritual that prepared me for the outcome. And yet, even so close, there was a shadow of uncertainty hanging over me. Because every revelation carries risk, and I knew that the moment of falling wouldn't exactly give me back the life I'd lost. It would bring something new, unpredictable, yet unformed. Maybe freedom, maybe solitude, maybe both. It was like standing before a half-open door, watching a beam of light pierce the darkness, but not knowing what awaits on the other side. And suspended in that moment, I understood that the greatest impact was yet to come. There were nights when I would sit on the edge of my bed, my feet touching the cold floor, feeling the weight of silence spread through the house. The world outside seemed distant, with its cars passing by on the street and the occasional barking of a dog. But here inside, every detail vibrated with an almost unbearable intensity. The creaking of the wood, the blowing of the wind against the window, even the sound of my own heart became part of an invisible orchestra that heralded what was yet to come. He slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm rising around him. The contrast was stark. His carefree, lost in banal dreams, and I awake, carrying a future he couldn't even imagine. His body felt too heavy, as if the mattress were swallowing him, while mine felt weightless, suspended by an energy that wouldn't let me rest. The shadow of the lamp stretched across the wall, reminding me that there were still dark parts of history waiting to be illuminated. Throughout the day, this duality continued. I maintained my routine, accomplished tasks, and smiled when necessary, but deep down, every gesture was calculated. The simple act of setting the dinner table became a metaphor. I lined up the cutlery and placed the plates neatly, but I knew the apparent order hid invisible cracks. The smell of the sauce simmering on the stove mingled with the heat of the pan, and even this familiar aroma carried with it a sense of farewell. As if each meal were the last before the great rupture. The world around me reacted in unexpected ways. Some people looked at me more closely, as if spotting cracks in the veneer of the perfect life he so often displayed. Others, perhaps out of convenience, chose not to see. It was this contrast between those who sensed it and those who ignored it that made everything even more tense. Because I knew that when the truth came out, no one could claim complete surprise. His downfall wouldn't be his alone. It would be reflected in every look he pretended not to see. There were moments when I doubted myself. Fear whispered, trying to convince me that perhaps it was too late, that exposure would bring me loneliness rather than relief. But then confidence returned, firm, reminding me that dignity is not a bargaining chip. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air rush in, and silently told myself that it was better to face the shadow head-on than to live at its mercy. With each passing day, the line between progress and challenge blurred. I was closer to the end, but also more aware of the risks. It was like walking down a road lit only by small points of light, knowing that one breath is all it takes to plunge back into darkness. Still, each step strengthened me. My heart beat faster, not just from fear but from anticipation. And then, on the quietest nights, I imagined what it would be like when the veil fell. Not in sharp detail, but in glimpses. The sound of raised voices, the unexpected glow of lights reflecting in astonished eyes, the breath caught in the throat of those who finally understand. It was like holding a taut rope ready to snap. And I knew that when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The moment arrived like a bolt of lightning cutting through the dark sky. There was no warning, only the inevitability of something that had been silently brewing. The doors opened, eyes turned, and suddenly there was no hiding. He was there, trapped in his own game, exposed before everyone. The murmurs spread like wildfire, every face revealing astonishment, disbelief, even suppressed laughter. It was like watching a mask fall in slow motion, and I, standing there with the calm I had cultivated for so long, simply watched. I didn't need to say anything. The scene spoke for itself. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer, as if they wanted to forever enshrine this unexpected spectacle. I watched his expressions change, his eyes pleading for help that would not come. And inside me something stirred. It wasn't pure revenge, it wasn't hatred, but an ancient release, a wound finally being washed away. It was like feeling the weight of years slipping from my shoulders and falling to the floor, leaving behind only the lightness of truth. The contrast was brutal. On one side, his downfall, surrounded by shame, unable to maintain the farce. On the other, my silence, erected like a fortress, proving that strength doesn't need shouting. I was living proof that dignity can wait, can be patient, and when it arrives like a clear storm, illuminating everything. It was in that moment that I understood that it wasn't just about him, but about me, the woman who resisted, the woman who refused to become invisible. The sounds blended together. The hurried sound of footsteps, the hum of low conversations, the rapid breathing of those who finally understood. I felt every second like an eternity, every detail like a painting never to be forgotten. The glow of lights reflected in the windows, curious eyes multiplied, and the truth echoed in every corner. It was impossible to erase, impossible to go back. And there lay the learning. The challenge had been enormous, the fear constant, but the achievement surpassed everything. I had proven to myself that silence can be louder than shouting, that waiting can be more powerful than rushing. And if you've come this far with me, you know that this transformation isn't just mine. It also belongs to those who recognize themselves in this journey, to those who understand that one should never beg for respect. Perhaps that's why so many feel the urge to leave a mark, like comment, subscribe, not out of obligation, but because they feel part of this revelation. Today, when I look back, I see not only the man who fell, but the woman who rose. The reflection in the mirror no longer shows someone wounded, but someone whole, who learned to say no, who learned to be her own answer. And if there's a privilege in following this story, it's realizing that each step, each silence, each choice, built an ending that doesn't belong to chance, but to courage. The true happy ending didn't come from him, nor from the fall I witnessed. It was born from the moment I chose myself, the moment I decided I wouldn't accept less than I deserve. And that's the gift I leave to those who walk alongside me in this narrative. The certainty that dignity isn't demanded, it's asserted. Those who understand this discover that, deep down, they've never been alone.